Well, thank you for sticking around on the last session on Friday, or the next to last session. I realize I'm the only thing standing between you and a restful weekend. So I want to tell you that I appreciate you being here. It's wonderful to have you. And this session is called Making Your Personal Story Pop with Creative Cloud. And it is about telling your personal story. And so by way of getting into that, I want to tell you my personal story. So this is me at age 5, 1980. My name is Jerry Silverman, and just in case you feel the urge to frantically scribble things down, I want to tell you that today's slides are going to be available right here and now, and also at the end, right? I'll pull them up nice and big on the screen, so don't worry about, just frantically taking notes. But the deck has also all of my contacts if ever you should feel the desire to get in touch with me. But, creativity starts pretty young, and I would venture to say that my creativity started with this free spirit bike that I used to ride at age 5, doing tricks and bunny hops and wheelies and whatnot. It's really kind of one of the first things I remember about being creative, drawing and all of that stuff, but really that bike was it. And probably one of the biggest inspirations in my life, creatively wise, was this lady, my grandmother. Her name was Rita, and she's dead. She passed away last year, age of 89. Probably one of my favorite people on the planet, as you can see, right? I look pretty happy there. So this session is in her memory. And it's really, I credit her and, kind of her spirit in leading me to my career, which has been a lot about creativity. I got a media studies degree at University of Florida and a computer art master's at SVA, Adobe certified expert in a ton of things, and I also got this peer-nominated award at Adobe, which they call the Founders Award, which I was completely not expecting at all, and still don't really think I deserve. But it's like the spirit of Adobe, genuine, exceptional, innovative, and involved. So maybe I'm a little of one, but all four, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, I speak at Adobe events all the time. And so this session is about storytelling, right? Making your own personal story pop. And so the question that I had while I was coming up with the content was, why is storytelling such an important skill? It's something that we all kind of do naturally, right? Like with our kids, or that we had stories told to us. This is a picture of my uncle, who's actually here in the audience right now, telling a story of Blueberries for Sal to my kids. Those are my 2 older daughters. And he's bald. Storytelling is an important skill for the following reason. And I think my uncle and the rest of us bald men in the audience are going to really connect with this story.
You be the judge.
Can you guess who has a hair replacement here? I'm Cy Sperling, president of Hair Club for Men. And what'll leave these men on screen? Well, I tell you that most men and women think they could spot a hair replacement a mile away. But I'm here to tell you that what they could spot is a bad hair replacement. Really good ones are virtually undetectable, even as close up as this. It's now possible for any man to solve his thinning hair problem undetectably. Just call our toll-free number now, and I'll send you our updated booklet that honestly discusses all the hair replacement methods, from hair weaves to transplants to minoxidil. Then you be the judge about what's best for you. Speaking of judging, what's your guess on our 4 men?
Who do you think? Who do you think, by the way, has a hair replacement in this? All of them. Wow. Who said all of them? You get the prize today.
There is all 4.
Oh my God.
Of Hair Club's strand-by-strand hair replacement system. And I should know, because I'm not only the Hair Club president, but I'm also a client.
What? He's also a client. His heart is linked to my heart in a very powerful way. His story links Cy Sperling, and by the way, Cy Sperling is a multi-bazillionaire. Like, his story not only linked to my heart and to my uncle's heart, and to the heart of all hearts and heads of all bald men everywhere, but yeah, he has a nice life in Boca Raton right now. And, you know, we don't really know the background of his story. We just know, we only know the absolutely critical pieces. That he is not only the president, but he had a problem that was seemingly insurmountable, and against all odds, rose to the top of this problem and defeated it, and is here for you. I love that, right? So when Cy Sperling's story touches my heart, his idea is just manifest as reality in my mind. It doesn't take that much. It's really not that complicated. So has anybody ever seen Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog? Just show me a show of hands, right? So about 8 or 9 years ago, there was, before Hulu and YouTube was really big, and Netflix and Amazon were creating their own content, there was a writer's strike, and Joss Whedon and all of his people decided to come up, they had a script, and it was about evil villain, supervillain wannabe, who had a video blog on the internet laying bare all of his own devices for everybody to know how he would take over the universe. This is a picture of him pointing out the freeze ray in the background there, that he stole wonderflonium from some secret vault to power the freeze ray. Which, you know, evil supervillains do not reveal their stories, they just do the dastardly deed, which is what made this story charming. It was about the supervillain not really being a villain after all. He was kind of a nice guy, and that's why he laid bare the devices of his nefarious planning. And it was very successful. They put out a DVD. This was a musical. It's called a sing-along blog because it was a musical. And they put out a DVD with a commentary track. So the character tells the story of his story. The commentary track tells the story of telling the story of telling the story. And it itself was a musical commentary track. Utterly brilliant, right? And it's the actors themselves singing about the role, singing about how they portrayed the role. It's really phenomenal for those of you who like that sort of thing. There's one song in particular sung by the creator, Joss Whedon, about this whole phenomenon that we have these days of the story not being enough. Like, we know the story, but how was the story made, right? Like, what are we want our little making of featurette, and we pick it apart until it's, you know, we expose the very heart of it until there's nothing left, right? And so I think that's a very familiar experience to storytelling. And so I'm going to pick my story apart a little bit more than just a dead grandma to give you a sense of why I decided to show you 16 Creative Cloud apps and services in 75 minutes, which is what we're going to do next. Okay? It's exciting. So I got this email in my inbox about September of last year from the Contemporary Jewish Museum. If you can't tell, Silverman, yes, you can figure it out for yourself, my ethnicity and religious background, but the Contemporary Jewish Museum sent me an email saying, hey, we've got this new program called My Family Story. It's for children ages 11 to 15. I have an 11-year-old daughter. You can create a piece of artwork together that explores family history, interviewing skills, art making together, right? So it's nice, father-daughter time, right? You could possibly win a trip to Israel if your art is good enough. I was like, freaking A, dude. Like, that's a $1,700 ticket. Sign me up. You know, of course, the chances of winning such a thing are pretty astronomical. But this is me and my 11-year-old daughter, Naomi. We showed up at the Contemporary Jewish Museum of San Francisco, which is actually quite a drive from where we live. We started doing research, and we found out that my daughter is actually a fifth-generation American, going back to this guy, Rudolf Schatz, who came over to the United States from Latvia in the 1880s, fleeing persecution, and became a wholesale tobacconist and chocolatier in Philadelphia, and was right there in the center of the bustling marketplace. And, you know, the Depression hit, and his son took over the business, and it became a retail store. And that son became my grandmother's father, and, you know, the rest is history. So the project that we made for this competition was called his name was Schatz. It's called Schatz's Drecka Mix, and it's a box of candy. But it's not an actual box of candy, right? I'm not only the president of Adobe, I'm also a client. So this was an Adobe project, an interactive fixed layout EPUB. Has anybody here ever made one of those in Adobe InDesign or know what an EPUB or an ebook is? Just let me see a show of hands. All right, so there's quite a few of us here. So the concept was that we made this interactive EPUB, which was a box of candy that told 10 little video vignettes of our family story that you could look at on your iPad or on your desktop. There was also an HTML5 version that we made that could be viewed and witnessed on your phone or mobile device. And then, of course, a YouTube playlist for those who did not want the candy box experience and a little more shareable via social media. So this is my daughter at my office in San Jose. We take the iPad, put it into a kiosk enclosure, and set it up and mess around with it. So I want to show you what we made just very quickly to give you a sense of how we're going to break down the lessons in Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and all the other.
Welcome to Schatz's Drecka Mix. Philly made sweets since 1930.
That's my daughter.
Tap the ribbon to open the box and enjoy.
Okay, so tap the ribbon to open the box and enjoy. There we go.
Pick a chocolate below to watch a story. You can tap with your finger or click with your mouse. The map above shows which chocolate goes with each story. To play all the stories together in order, choose Play All on the right-hand side.
I'm going to choose the introduction.
To see how he made the... My name is Naomi Silverman. I'm 11 years old. I'm making this project with the help of my father and many other members of my family as a tribute to my great-grandmother, Rita Rosen, who is one of our favorite people in the whole world. I was Rita's very first great-grandchild, and I was very lucky to have her in my life during my early childhood. She always had lots of sweets at her house, and we would also go out to get them sometimes. One of my very favorite things in the whole world is candy. And I recently learned that Grandma Rita grew up in a candy store in Philadelphia in the 1930s. I also love being Jewish and doing all kinds of Jewish things. For this project, I wanted to learn about Grandma's history. What was her candy store like? What did she do in it? How did her family get into that business? Also, what was her family's Jewish life like? Did they have any interesting traditions or stories? To find out, I interviewed her nephew Bruce Schatz, her niece Robin Schatz, and read a family book made by her niece Rebecca Schatz of blessed memory. I hope you find the stories sweet.
Pretty nice, right? She did that mostly by herself.
Touch the X to choose another candy, or touch the forward or back buttons to go to the next or previous story.
And we'll go
Pick a chocolate below to watch a story.
We'll go through one nice little story here.
Henry and Gertie's store was a general store, not a big supermarket and not a convenience store. The family lived upstairs from the store. The kids, Bert, Rita, and Joe, would come downstairs after school and help out with the store. They sold two types of candy in the store. One kind was rock candy, or crystallized sugar. The other kind was chocolates. The rock candy came in big chunks. A typical chunk was the size of a basketball. Bert and Joe had the idea that they could chip off pieces and eat it. They had a running competition for who could chip the biggest piece off without their parents noticing. Rita would watch them doing it, and they'd have to bribe her with rock candy to keep her quiet. Once in a while, a shipment of chocolates would come in misshapen or crushed. Henry would melt down all the confections, mixing the chocolate together with whatever fillings were inside. He would shape the mixture into cubes and resell them under the name Drecka Mix. Drecka Mix was our store's most popular candy. The customers would always ask for it. By the way, Drecka is a Yiddish word that means rubbish or trash.
Trash mix. Love it. One more
Pick a chocolate below to watch.
One more to prove the point of telling the story of the story and why that is important.
This project was made as an entry into an international competition called My Family Story, which is hosted by the International School for Jewish Peoplehood Studies at Beit Hatfutzot, the Museum of the Jewish People. We participated through a series of workshops held at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco, California. My father and I worked together to interview relatives, do research, write scripts, collect and edit images, record audio and music, and assemble the final videos in the interactive ebook. We made the 11 videos using a simple, free storytelling app called Spark Video.
Ding.
We also visited a 104-year-old confectionery in San Jose, California, to do research and gather the visual materials that you see in this project.
Anyone got a tissue? So, telling the story of telling the story is very important, and here's why, at least for us. Right? This My Family Story competition, 20,000 families.
Touch the X to choose another candy.
Hold on.
Or touch the forward or back.
It's meant to be played in a kiosk, you know, so it goes back. 20,000 families from 25 different countries submit entries to this competition through different institutions, through museums and educational institutions. And what happens is those are whittled down to like 600, and this museum decides on the top 50 to be brought into their annual exhibition in Tel Aviv, and they will fly you to Tel Aviv. And of course, I wouldn't be standing here right now if like our project wasn't one of the top 50, and we got it. Yes, we made it. And not only was Naomi's project selected, and there's her in the gallery showing it off in the kiosk, and all the other fantastic submissions. Not only was it selected, but she also won first place. Yeah, thank you. So it was a pretty big deal for both of us, for all of us, in the family, and there's a lot of bad news out there in the world. So we were happy to actually contribute to some of the good news in the world, and it got a lot of coverage. In fact, StoryCorps, if you guys are familiar with that, it was original NPR project. So they actually featured us for the Great Thanksgiving Listen, which is an educational curriculum and lesson plan that they do every year, because kids get together with their grandparents and they the grandparents tell stories. Why not record that? Why not make it a project for your family, recording history? So we were really honored that StoryCorps created a lesson plan in cooperation with Adobe featuring our project. So let's get down to actual brass tacks of how we did it. And again, Photoshop, Lightroom, Premiere Pro, Adobe Media Encoder, InDesign, Stock, Acrobat, Creative Cloud Assets, Illustrator, Spark Page, Spark Video, Typekit, Audition, Libraries, and Market. 16 apps. How much more time do I have? Right? It was a lot. And probably my most important message to any and all of you is don't be afraid of these. What I want to do is show you how doing very simple tasks in each of these is actually really easy, and in combination can be extremely powerful. So the research that we did, and we actually, ironically, used StoryCorps' own method around warm-up questions, right, asking specific names and dates and places, open-ended questions, right, like say, tell me a story, Grandma, tell me a story, Aunt Robin, about X, Y, and Z, and then doing follow-up, and then what happened, right? It's a very simple formula that we followed to do those interviews, but luckily what we also had access to was a family book, an archive that was really helpful. But, getting that physical book, a lot of the winning projects were physical books. We wanted to do something better. And luckily, the compiler of the book, Rebecca, who had passed away already by the time we were doing this project, she had scanned these into a 71-page PDF, which is great, except for PDFs are usually kind of flat and you can't really do anything. So what I used Adobe Acrobat DC to do was make that scanned PDF super useful for this project. Right? It allowed us to reuse a lot of that important content while maintaining the whole fidelity and workspace that we had. So here's that 71-page PDF. Over on the right-hand side, there's the Edit PDF button, right? That jolly candy-like pink button that lets you edit. When you click that, it converts the entire scanned page to editable, copy and pastable text and images. So you see that blue bounding box down there at the bottom of the text. I could now copy and paste that text into a script or onto a website or whatever, right? Not only that, you see the blue bounding box around the image, I could now edit that using Photoshop directly from inside the PDF, and when it opened up in Photoshop, notice that it was already cropped, right? This is like people don't know about how useful Acrobat is for things like this when they get scanned documents, so allow me to evangelize that. Super useful, especially with a 71-page PDF of photos. You might have also noticed that we had the My Family Story logo, right? Where did we get that? Well, I found a PDF. I grabbed the logo, right-clicked it and said, edit using Adobe Illustrator, and Illustrator pops open, and there is the vector logo, right? A lot of times people publish PDFs without flattening them into bitmap or whatever, and that, right, all I had to do was take the artboard tool and fit the artboard to the artwork bounds, and I had a perfectly good vector object to work with in that PDF. Again, using Acrobat to just right-click and grab that vector art. So it was really great. So again, really, really simply, edit that PDF, that pink button over there on the right-hand side. Optical character recognition to get that text, and then that edit-in functionality to maintain my workspace. Mwah. Thank you, Acrobat. So now I've got a bazillion photos. How am I going to organize and collect them? How do I compose those photos and edit them and output them or sync them to other, the rest of my cloud? It's all Lightroom. Now what you're going to see here, this is before the new Lightroom, Lightroom CC was out, so I was using Lightroom Classic, which is still a great tool, and I actually love it. My problem is I have 38,000 pictures in my family archive, notwithstanding this new 71-page document. So the way I weed through these is 3 tools, right? Flags, which is you use the P key to pick, or the U key to unpick, right? I use ratings, 1 to 5 stars. That's just the number 1 to the number 5 on your keyboard. And then color coding, right? So let's say I'm going through and I pick a whole bunch of them, and I star a whole bunch of them, and I color code a whole bunch of them, and now I've got those. One of the really powerful features of Lightroom is the ability to create collections. And what I did with those collections is I created what's called a smart collection. And this is just like a bucket that looks for criteria, and if those criteria are met, then it drags those assets into the bucket, right? So in this example, I created a My Family Story smart collection that if any asset has a pick flag that is flagged, if any asset has a rating that's greater or equal to 5 stars, any asset is red, then it's going to look for it, grab it, put it into the bucket, put it into that smart collection. So as you can see, that smart collection, out of 38,000 something photos, it picked out my 67 that I needed, right? So flagging, starring, and coloring, mwah, right? So I do that all in library mode. There's also something called develop mode, and that's where, I don't know if you noticed how nicely those photos looked, but there's quite a bit of retouching you have to do to a 100-year-old photo to get it. This is not 100 years old, but neither is the lady. But we're just gonna look at the things that I use. These are my super fast tricks to get a picture looking better, and it's in the basic module, in the develop module, just in the basic set of tools, right? It's called basic over there. That auto button, did you guys see? I think it was in the keynote. I think Jason Levine or somebody hit an auto button, and all of a sudden, the image just looks better and the sliders adjust. I think it was Brian O'Neill Hughes who did that, right? Of course, since you're working non-destructively in a raw workspace, you can change the temperature to cooler or hotter. You can change the tint from greener to magenta-er. Right? You can make it softer by decreasing the clarity, or make it hard as nails by increasing the clarity. I love the vibrance because it has a really good algorithm for detecting which parts of the image should be more saturated and which should not, especially with faces and people. So I always jack the vibrance, right? We're still in the basic module, but vibrance is really important. And then when it comes to effects, I really like vignetting because it helps to center the eye. So I always turn the vignetting up. I never use white vignetting because I hate it. But you might love it, right? You can change the midpoint, the roundness, right? You can feather the vignette or not feather the vignette. It does not really matter. And then you can crop it just using the crop overlay button. And what I do usually, in this land and world of Instagram and social media is like the 1:1 aspect ratio is always good, so I apply that. And now the thing I love most about Lightroom is the fact that you can look at the history, and it's not like when you close your Lightroom session, the history goes away, like with Photoshop. With Photoshop, your history is gone when you close the application. With Lightroom, you get a complete, persistent list of everything you ever did to the image, so from importing to finishing. You guys see the difference in the before and after? It's amazing, right? And very fast. So the last thing that I usually do is take all those adjustments and turn it into a preset. In the presets panel, there's a little plus button, and all of those different things that I did, the temperature, the white balance, the exposure, contrast, everything, can be turned into a preset. And if I go back in the library module and I say, hey, I'd like to apply that preset to a whole collection, I just go directly in there and use the My Family Story preset, right? Really useful, fast, easy, and again, that's one of the powers of Lightroom Classic. Now, getting these images out, right, exporting them, of course, you can make another preset as well by adding a preset, right? If you have a compression that you like, if you have somewhere specific where you want it to go, you set up that preset and you're good. One of the things that I do instead of exporting the images is I sync those images in Lightroom to Lightroom Mobile, or to that imaging repository that we now have like 1 terabyte of storage in. Right? And what that does is allow me to access, that's what the icon looks like over there on the left, right? That little sync icon. And what that allows me to do is get to those assets on the web, and also inside of a lot of other applications, which I'll show you. But that collection, that smart collection, right, just right there at lightroom.adobe.com, right, I can now share that smart collection, put it on a web gallery, share it with Adobe Portfolio, and etc. So again, flags, stars, colors, and collections. Right? Basic development, effects, and presets, and do you want to export, sync, or share? That's why I love Lightroom. So Spark Video is what we use to make those beautiful videos, and you'll see why I chose to sync Adobe Spark in just a second, right? This is a tool that lets you create video anywhere, leveraging those existing assets that you just made, that you just synced in Lightroom, and export for finer grade editorial, right? So who here has played with Adobe Spark or Adobe Spark Video, right? It's amazing. It's really, it changed my whole life, right? And it's just spark.adobe.com. You select the jolly candy-like blue button, and you say Create New Video, which is what I want to make. And you give it a title, you select a template, right? There's like a template, Make Up My Own, which is the one that I like because it's not kind of telling me what to do. The interface is really simple, right? You go in and you add a photo. Now, remember when I synced all of that smart collection in Lightroom to Lightroom Mobile? Well, what do you think is going to happen over there when I want to come in and get a photo from my laptop or from the Creative Cloud? I'm going to go to Lightroom and pull that photo out of that smart collection that I had already made in Lightroom. That saves me so much time when I'm trying to get things done. So that is the My Family Story Smart Collection. There's that photo that we just made in Lightroom. I can pull it right in. And if it's too big, I can use the pencil icon, right? Which means edit, to kind of magnify down and up to get that photo where I want it. I've got 3 things I can do in Spark Video, right? I can mess with the layout, I can mess with the music, and I can mess with the themes. And it's pretty easy, right, when you're talking about layout, right? You come over and like give it a split screen, give it a full screen, give it a caption screen, right? I chose caption because I wanted to type in and say, this is my grandma, right? Looks pretty good, but then once you type in that caption, you can choose any other layout, the split screen or anything else, right? My daughter likes the flare theme. Whatever, okay, fine, I have 3 daughters, so I'm just like, it is my life, flare. So anyway, and then add music. I allowed her taste in music is not mine, but I said, you get to choose the music as well. And I think she did a good job, actually. But you can choose, there's all this royalty-free music. You can change the volume. You can add your own music. You can just turn it off if you want. And then, seriously, like, I know she sounded like she was in a booth or a professional studio, but it was like a cheap, like the headphones that come with your iPhone plugged into the laptop and we just like sat there and went doot and clicked on the mic, and 2-3 seconds go by, you see the little waveform down there, and it counts you off. And she was just talking into the laptop. No booth, no expensive snowball mic or anything like that. And we were off to the races. And then it actually tells you how long it is. You can actually, if you screw it up, you can remove the narration and start over, which is perfect, especially with an 11-year-old. We took a lot of takes to get it right. And you can also lengthen, if you remove the narration, you can lengthen it if you just want it to be like kind of a silent musical thing. Then you can add another slide, right? Like, this is my grandma, but remember that one with the candy store? It's all made out of icons, right? Like, she was jealous, and right, or whatever the narrative was. You can go over, like, click icons, like type in jealous or candy store or sneaking around, and you get a whole darn list of royalty-free icons that you can like drop right on in there. And they're great, and they're royalty-free, and they're great. So, in this case, I would put it in as a split screen. I'd type in some flair text. And then, we didn't share these via Spark. What we did is we clicked share, and then we downloaded this as an unbranded MP4 file, right? So we got a nice MP4 video file, and we took the next step with Premiere Pro, which I'm going to show you, right? So again, we were able to do this actually on the laptop and also on the iPad and sometimes on the iPhone. Leveraging those existing assets that we use with Lightroom and exported for finer grid editorial with Premiere Pro, where we were just able to very easily import that footage, create the composition, and just put in very basic transitions and edits, and then export directly for the EPUB and for the YouTube channel. It's a really great integration here that saved us a ton of time. When you're in Premiere Pro and you make a new project, it can be a little bit daunting because you're not sure, like, what the heck is it asking me? What the heck is a scratch disk? I don't care. Just let me save my project. So don't worry about it. Like, seriously, don't worry about it. Unless you have like zero memory on your computer, don't worry about that. So, and also don't worry about the interface. There's really only a few things that you need to know, right? Down here on the left-hand side is your project files. That's where all your content is gonna go. Right? You import that content. There's that video that we exported, right? Very simple. It comes into your project view. You can right-click on that content and say, create a new sequence from that clip, and it's automatically going to create a sequence based on all the specs of that clip, the resolution and the frame rate and the codec and the audio codec, and it's going to drop it right into a nice little timeline sequence that you can go through and edit. Right? You can add, you can just right-click. Right-clicking is like how you do everything all the time, anywhere. But specifically, right-clicking the edge of a clip in Premiere Pro will allow you to put on a default transition, which, does anybody have a guess as to what the default transition in Premiere Pro is? Cross-dissolve. Yes, it's not that complicated, actually. And a cross-dissolve is just going from one state to another with a nice, clear fade, right? And you can see it up there in the effects panel, which you really don't need to mess around with. It's just a very simple transition. And if you want to do things like, for example, unlink the audio from the video so that you can cut the video without impacting the audio, you can do that as well. You can grab the edge of that video that you've unlinked and you can just drag it over to wherever you want and it'll shorten the video without impacting the audio. Then you can use the razor tool, right, or hit C for cut. Right? The Kaiser tool. I don't know why it's not R, but whatever. Right? And you can dice up that video however you want. Then with the selection tool, just like in Photoshop, you can grab that piece that you've gotten and cut and paste it a few times to fill it out. Right? This is a standard technique that I use to lengthen a video that might be a little too short. You can also extend it by slowing it down. But then apply another default transition. And that's it. That's all. I swear that's all I use Premiere Pro for, is to do the most basic thing. And it's fine. It's totally fine. Exporting the media, the reason I like Premiere Pro for these types of things is because of the next thing I'm going to show you, which is the exporting workflow that allowed me to get to the iPad and YouTube all in one without having to do a lot of extra encoding or extra work, right? So this is the encoding interface for Premiere. And up here, there's just a ton of, you guessed it, presets. That's right. Thank you for following, sir. Right, the presets over here, there are, the technical term for this is a bazillion, But, I chose Apple TV iPad for the ones that we were going to put into the EPUB. And then, of course, you could do straight to YouTube if that's the only place you're going. But the power of this interface is not just that you can encode one or the other, but that there's this social media panel over on the right. So if I already have a YouTube account, for example, that YouTube playlist, I can very easily encode to iPad and then transcode to YouTube all in one fell swoop just by logging in that panel and saying what the metadata is and where I want it to go. And so what Premiere and Adobe After Effects are going to do is they're going to encode for the iPad and then pass that encode along through to YouTube, all one fell swoop, and all I have to do is check a checkbox, right? It's pretty friggin' sweet. And then I can save that whole thing as a preset. Yes, you're noticing some themes going on, right? That's why you should not be afraid of other Adobe applications than the one that you learned and are familiar with, because they're all actually very similar together. So what I do now is add this to the Adobe Media Encoder queue. This is another reason I like using Premiere and Adobe Media Encoder to do this, because as you notice, there are actually 10 videos, 10 little 1-minute vignettes that we made, and a YouTube playlist that we made. We're not just working on one independent video, right? So Adobe Media Encoder opens up, and it's got this lovely queue, and it recognizes my family story preset over there on the left-hand side, so I can apply that preset to anything now, right? So let's say here's Premiere Pro with 5 or 6 of my projects open all at one time, right? So there's my original project. Over in the project panel, I can just select all of those sequences, right-click, and say Export Media. I get this wonderful dialog from which I can pick my preset. I export, notice that nice, lovely queue of videos that are all going to the same place. They're all going to iPad and to YouTube, and they are all ready to go. I want to turn on hardware acceleration through the GPU so that it goes a little bit faster. I want to click the jolly candy-like green button in the upper right-hand side that says Start Queue, and it's just going to start cranking through, right? With that GPU acceleration, it actually goes pretty fast, and it spits out all my videos while I got up to get a cup of coffee. So again, importing the footage, creating that composition, basic transitions and edits, and that export. That's really the power play, the export to all those different media. Now, remember, you might have seen this picture, right? The photos are something that Naomi actually did a lot of. And once we took those into Photoshop, the idea was to take a picture of the empty box, then, right, and make that look nice with Photoshop. Then take a picture of the candy all by itself sitting there, because we wanted to give it more of a menu-y type of feel. We didn't want it to look like an actual box of candy. We wanted it to look somewhat more, I don't know, there's that je ne sais quoi that tells you that it's an interface and not like a real box, you know? We wanted to modify the candy a little bit and the flexibility to do it with Photoshop and Smart Objects and Puppet Warp, and you'll see. Right, and then we put the buttons, right? You see those cool candy-like buttons? We got those from the Adobe Creative Cloud Market, which is cool. And then we used Illustrator and Typekit to create the Whitman sampler box map, right? The candy map. That was personally my favorite part. And then, we used Typekit and Illustrator to create all of that flair. And then, of course, Adobe Stock for the stuff that we didn't actually have photographs for. Right? Like those purple ribbons did not exist. Like there was no box of ribbon from that 104-year-old candy store. So if you're not a Photoshop expert, I don't want to turn you into one in this, but the principles behind what we did are pretty universal across all Photoshop users, right? Selection and masking, adjustments and special effects, non-destructive editing, that's huge. Non-destructive editing saves your life. And creating these layout and user interface elements. So it was really important. This is not the newest version of Photoshop, so don't mistake it for the latest and greatest, but the principles still stick, right? So this is the photo that Naomi took of the empty box of candy, right? And what we did was started a new group. We created these layer groups. It's really important to stay organized in Photoshop, or else you lose your way very quickly. Right? And to label. I also do a lot of color labeling, right? It's really important to me. And what I usually like to do is unlock the bottom layer, because it lets me mess around with it, and when it's locked, you can't really do that much. So using the selecting and masking interface, right, this is the photo of candy that I want to lay inside the candy box. I would come up and use the quick selection tool, right, and just do a very quick pass over the candy. You notice the marching ants, right? And now in that view, I can turn on the onion skin view and see where I've selected the candy versus not selected the candy. This is really simple. You just drag the quick select tool over the candy, and it does a great job of edge detection, right? And speaking of edge detection, you can actually touch that up with the radius and the smart radius and really kind of get that mask nice and tight, right? And then, of course, you can also shift the edge a little bit. You can decontaminate the background colors and remove the color fringe from the image, and then export that as a layer with a layer mask. I'm not going to get deep into the concept of layer masking right now, right? Because it's kind of complicated. But once I had this candy composited off of the background, I used Creative Cloud libraries to make this candy available in all of my other applications, right? This candy, I'm going to use it in other places, specifically in Illustrator, in order to get that Whitman sampler map, right? So what you can do is either drag that asset directly over into libraries, or you can add it using the libraries thing. But notice it just like comes right into the libraries panel there, and you can name it whatever you want, and it looks like what it is, right? So now when I have that box of candy open, I can just drag the candy straight from my library over onto my canvas and scale it and do stuff like perspective warp. You saw a few warps in the keynote. Perspective warp I like because you can lay out like a grid. You see this grid that we have here over the candy. And then you can actually warp the grid. So you guys see the difference, right? You're kind of warping the candy in perspective. And so what I was doing was, you know, the shot that we had of the candy, I needed to kind of fit it into the box a little bit so it looked right. And that's what we did. And then puppet warp, which is new in Illustrator, it's actually been in Photoshop for a long time. You lay down pins, and then you can warp individual little segments. So you can get it exactly the way that you want it, right? Very specific way. But these are non-destructive. I can turn puppet warp, right? You see how I did that? You can turn perspective warp and puppet warp on and off. It's really cool. And I love that non-destructiveness. You can also like grab something like an adjustment layer, for example, and you can clip that adjustment layer or that adjustment mask so that you're only impacting the levels that you're trying to do are only going to impact the layer that is clipped, right? So I really just want to make that candy look a little bit better. So check it out over my properties panel. I can just change the layers. You guys notice how the candy goes from like that dark to that light, right? Oops, I'm losing my way here. And of course, vibrance, right? Cranking that vibrance up. You see how much more vibrant the candy is. It might not come across on the screen that much. But I really love that, making the vibrance a little bit better. And of course, the ever-present drop shadow, because we wouldn't be designers without drop shadowing everything in sight. And it's fine, it's okay. The drop shadow dialog is part of the layer styles dialog, which looks like, I don't know, like the inside of Kit, the car, the hyper-intelligent car. But putting in a drop shadow is actually pretty easy, and there's a lot of controls around that, and it's actually really easy. But getting away from the drop shadow to those buttons. Remember those buttons that we had? Those nice, like, circular... I mean, everybody can draw a circle and a triangle, but I don't have the time to draw a circle and a triangle. I just want somebody to do it for me. And that's why in the Creative Cloud desktop app, I can look over in my market, and there's a whole bunch of different kinds of assets in there that are, again, my favorite thing, royalty-free, meaning I already paid through my Creative Cloud membership to have access to these. And if I look up user interfaces, well, there's a play button, right? Looks pretty good. I just searched on play. There's my play button. I can download it directly into the My Family Story library. It pops right in my library as a button. I drag it onto the canvas. I make it a little bit smaller. I duplicate, or I invert it so that it's white. And I change the overlay to, or I change the blend mode to overlay so it looks kind of naturalistic, right? And then I go for the bevel and emboss, right? A designer's other friend when you're trying to make candy. And I was seriously, I'm doing this, with my laptop open in bed. Like my wife looks over and she's like, "Oh, you mean the candy didn't have that before?" And I turned off the bevel and emboss. She was like, "Whoa!" And I've been doing this for 20 years now. It's not like bevel and emboss is not a thing to me anymore. But I loved surprising her with it. So bevel and emboss, right? It's just going to give that embossed look to the candy. So it looks like the confectioner actually poked a circle, an arrow into the surface of the candy, right? It's simple, it's subtle, but it's cool. And bevel and emboss in the layer styles is a good thing. And then you hold down Alt, you click the asset that you have, and you drag it over 10 times, and voila, you've got 10 play buttons, right? And of course, they're all in my color-coded layer group in my layers panel, because staying organized is very important when you're working on a project of this scope and size. So again, selecting the candy off the background and then masking it, cool. Using a smart filter like perspective warp or puppet warp. Using that adjustment layer to control the color and the vibrance and the levels of just the layer that you care about, right? CC libraries so that I can take something from one file, bring it over to something in another file very easily, and mark it where I got that circle and triangle that I didn't want to have to take the time to make, and layer styles and blend modes so that we give that bevel, emboss, drop shadow, and overlay mode to everything, right? Pretty cool. Who here doesn't know what a vector is? Good. You can all stay. If anybody raised their hands, I would have kicked them out. Right? Going bitmap to vector, very important. It's one of the things that made Illustrator famous back in 1980 whenever, right? Typekit integration, very cool, and I use it all the time. Smart objects, a very important consideration, right? So Illustrator, you just create a new artboard. And using Creative Cloud libraries, why, look at that. I've got my little candy dude right there that I can drag right onto the artboard. It comes in a little big, so I just scale it down, right, using the Shift key to maintain the proportions. Then I'm going to go to my workspace, because my workspace is right now in Essentials, but I'm really going to be doing tracing, right? That's what we're doing. We're tracing this bitmap and making it vector. And that brings up the image trace dialog, which was new in like CS6 timeframe, but that's been 5 years ago. So if you're an Illustrator user and you don't know what this is, you're also invited to leave. But right when you click the little preview button, it shows you a preview of how it's going to transform it in whatever combination you want. I chose black and white because Whitman sampler maps are usually in black and white. And there's all kinds of thresholds that you can change about how many lines are going to be in it and how many corners, right? There's like an advanced workflow where you can say, well, I want fewer corners and fewer paths and less noise, and right, I only want fills or I only want strokes, and it can get pretty complicated. But usually I just like just jiggle the handle until it works, until it looks like what I want it to look like. There's no science for me. I know if you've been to Morty Golding's class, he has like an actual science to this, and I don't care. Right, so now that I care about Morty, I love him, but anyway, once you're done and you've got the result pretty close to what you want, you click the expand button up there in the control panel, and now it's an actual shape that you can go and do things like, right, and it is outlines, it's vector outlines. You can go and take the eraser tool and just erase that crud that you didn't want in there, right? You see how there's still a little bit of detritus around the candy? You just take the eraser tool and just erase it, and it looks a lot better. Right now I'm going to just take the rounded rectangle tool and just create, well, a rounded rectangle and give it a 2 or 3 point stroke. I think I gave it a 1 point stroke, I don't know, but I expanded it out. Use the type tool to tap in some simple text. And here's where Typekit makes a huge difference for me. Because when you have, and this is actually newer in Illustrator, is when you just hover your mouse over a different typeface, up there in the type menu, it actually shows you what that typeface is going to look like in the context of the layout. Photoshop has had this feature for a while, but that's a new thing. If I don't like any of my typefaces that I have, I can just go into Typekit, and it opens up my browser to my Adobe Typekit license, right? It's over 1,000 fonts that you can sync to your desktop. And the thing that differentiates Typekit from a lot of the other type foundries that you might get fonts from is that the selection process, and we actually have a white paper that describes how Typekit is actually up to 4 times faster in the way that you can seek through classifications, heading recommendations, all the different properties for weight, width, X height, contrast, caps, all caps or not, or figure styles. You can go through this 4 times faster than any of the other foundries that offer lots of multiple fonts. So it's really cool. So what I did is just look for the thing that I want. It gave me two options, right? Bodoni and Ratio. I liked Bodoni. I thought it looked a little more old-timey. And so I went in and just like kind of scrolled through, right? Put in some text like Schatz's and rolled down to find the weight that I wanted, the, URW extra bold. And then I just clicked ye old sync button, and that font just synced right to my desktop. It was pretty nice. And now I can see it in my Creative Cloud desktop app, right in the fonts list, right? There's Bodoni. It's definitely synced. If I wanted to manage those fonts and unsync some of those fonts, I would click the Manage Fonts button, and it would pop me out to a separate thing showing me that I can really only have 100 fonts synced at one time. It's enough for me. I don't know if you guys are like crazy about fonts. Maybe 100 is not enough for you, but it's totally enough for me to get done what I need. I don't need all those fonts installed at one time. And the nice thing about Typekit is you don't have to have them. They're always there for you. I had 89, so it wasn't a big deal. And without closing Illustrator and reopening it, without closing the file and reopening it, once I selected that font, it automatically became available in Illustrator for me to use, right? So that's really powerful that I can look for a font, find it, install it, and immediately apply it without closing my file, having to save, right? That's a big, huge time saver as well. Now, if I wanted to filter my font list based on only Typekit fonts so I could see only the Typekit fonts that I have installed, I can do that. And I can also add favorites. I can star them. Again, this is like the idea of the preset where I can search only on my favorites, right? So Bickham Script and Bodoni URW were my favorites. Those are the ones that I chose because they looked old-timey. And this is kind of the final product. Of course, then I added with Bodoni, right? I added the numbers, and with, which was probably, I don't know, Arial or Helvetica, I added the titles. Just being really simple. Then I selected all of my work. I grouped it all together in one group or hit Command G. I opened up my Creative Cloud libraries, and guess what I did? Saved it as a Who said that? You snarky. That was a good one. I actually didn't drag it in. I used the button. Right? Add content. Because I didn't want the fill color or the stroke color, I just wanted the graphic, right? So I added it, it came on in, great, wonderful, and now when I go back to Photoshop, there it is in my library, and I can drag it right on, add the nice overlay blend mode, use the perspective warp to get it into perspective of the box, and boom, right? Nice job. Thank you to Whitman's for the idea. So again, that tracing workspace and live trace panel, super useful for doing stuff like this. Typekit integration, it just bolsters my creativity. Smart objects, that's what I was using for the, that's another way of saying the libraries there. Now that purple ribbon, I'm not making this up, it really was the perfect asset. This ribbon was like the exact, it's the little details that sell it. It really is, and I needed those little details. And stock is good for a lot more than little details, but the real time saver was not having to exit my workflow and just licensing it really fast. I mean, it was pretty cheap. Of course, I'm not only the president, I'm also a client, so I do get a discount. But right there in libraries, right, I don't have to leave. I can just type in what I want in stock, and it just searches for me. And no, I didn't want a bow, and so I just pulled the libraries panel out and kind of stretched it out and looked, and lo and behold, there were some ribbons that looked good. Of course, they were red, so that was a little inconvenient. And it notices that this actually differentiates Adobe Stock from a lot of the other competitors like Getty and Shutterstock, is that our libraries panel recognizes that you've licensed it before. So that also saves me time. I don't have to relicense something 16 times before I get the picture that I paid for it once. So there it is, right? I was able to load it right into my library from the libraries panel and then just drag it onto the canvas or double click it, and it opens up in full glorious high resolution. I can use that selecting and masking capability, right? The quick select tool, drag around it, create a mask, use one of those layer masks that I did to adjust the color, right? Adjust the hue and the saturation, right? I don't know what I'm trying to say with this particular thing, but there we go. Like drop them all in, added a drop shadow to both of them because everybody loves drop shadows, and I was done, right? Adobe Stock saved me a lot of time. That in-app search, the libraries integration, and remembers which asset was licensed, right? Pretty good. Now here, this was the bulk of the ebook was made in InDesign. And I know you probably noticed those cool like animations on the buttons, right? They kind of appeared and disappeared. So those timed animations were really important. Also, when the little X lights up when she says, hit the X to choose another candy, right? We had to kind of, create those buttons and those action and that media inside of InDesign, and it was a ton of testing and exporting and publishing that we had to do to get it right. So who here uses InDesign with regularity? Right, good. So a lot of us do it for, PDF, a lot of us do it for print. A fixed layout EPUB was the medium that we chose because, it allows that multimedia and it's fixed layout, so what you see is what you get when you're reading it in context of an ebook reader. When you go to create a new file in InDesign, there's a whole bunch of templates, some free templates from Adobe Stock for print, web, and mobile. And since I knew which device I was going for, which was the iPad, I decided to choose, iPad 1024/768. And over there in the, in the details, I made sure that it was in landscape mode, right? So that it was not, we're not looking at it like so, we're looking at it like so. And, gives me this nice little layout here. And of course, I can go in and say Command D and place, which is always better than dragging in. I had that PSD. It drops right into my page in InDesign. And of course, in my Pages panel, I can see that it's the only page in that entire thing. Of course, I also have a layers menu like with Photoshop, for those not familiar with InDesign, that I can turn layers on and off, which is very important. And of course, your links, which is where you find all of the assets that are either linked or embedded. It's a very important place to look. And it's also very important, right? Like, I don't know about you, but when I look at that candy box, and this is something that I try and pay attention to, it's like, the circle with the triangle, like, I want that triangle filled. Like, there's very few confectioners who would create an arrow that looks like that. I think they'd want the arrow to be filled and a little bit flatter. So what I can do from the links panel is just say edit original. I can right click it and say edit original, or I can just hit the pencil, which as we know allows you to edit. It's going to pop up in Photoshop, and it's kind of ugly. Now remember where I got those arrows from? Market, that's correct. Nice try. Better luck next time. We got it from Market. And what was it? Did you guys see the file extension of what it was? It was an SVG, right? Scalable vector graphics, which is just another way of saying vectors, right? And so it is an embedded little cloud asset that if I double click it from inside Photoshop, it will open up Illustrator, because it is like everything in the CC Market. It's a collection of vector shapes. So all I have to do is grab the polygon tool and turn it into a triangle, fill it with black, save it, and notice what happens over in my libraries. That asset gets saved with the change that then propagates out back to Photoshop, right? When I save the asset in Photoshop, it's going to propagate back to InDesign, right? Pretty nice. It's a good workflow. And it involves like all three of them. This is why Creative Suite was a thing. Because of that integrated workflow. So, I turned off those buttons there in Photoshop, and I saved them. And I might have to refresh InDesign to see that I've turned those off. Because to create those buttons in InDesign, what I had to do is I had to have two layers. I had to have the layer without the buttons and the layer with the buttons. And the layer with the buttons are the things that kind of appear and that you can tap. So I duplicated that layer. I relinked to a version of the file with the buttons on them, and then I scaled that down, I scaled the frame down so that I just had one button there, right? So think of it as two layers. The layer on the bottom is the same exact picture, just without any of my market buttons turned on. The layer above is the one with all of the market buttons turned on. And then I take the frame and crop it down so that only the button is showing. And I do that, I duplicate that step 10 more times. So now, what's that? Like a rollover, exactly. Used to do this in Fireworks. And Image Ready, yes. Don't get me started. Anyway, so I made 10 of those like nice candy-like little overlays. And of course, you can turn them on and off if you put them all in a group or in a folder and label it, which is what I recommend that you do. There's a great there's a great workspace in Adobe InDesign called Digital Publishing, and it used to mean something else for digital publishing, but now what it means is for fixed layout EPUBs. And it brings up a series of panels that are going to be useful. They were useful to Naomi and I for doing this project. Animation, timing, media, buttons, and EPUB interactivity preview. Those are the 5 panels in InDesign that we use to do this. And with animations, it was really simple. We just wanted the button to appear, right? And so to do that, we just used a very basic, simple fade in, right? Fade in effect. And it just makes the button fade in. And then it would go away and fade in again because we'd loop it with all of the rest of them. So all of those buttons, if I selected all of them and I apply fade into all of them, they're all going to fade in at exactly the same time, which doesn't look great, right? What we need to do is use the timing panel to stagger them out a little bit. And so what I do is select all of them, choose to play them all together at the same time, but then give them a 5-second delay from one another. So, or not a 5-second, I'm sorry, a 0.5 second. So they would come in half a second after the next. So this one fades in, then this one really quickly, right? So if I wanted to see and then loop it so that it fades in, then it fades in again, then it fades in again, and it's got this really nice little effect. And so to preview that, I'd use this little preview button called Preview EPUB, and it would actually build a little version of the EPUB, and it would play it back in this panel. So I got a couple of screen caps, and you can see, right, it gives that nice Christmas tree light effect of like the Christmas lights where they kind of like do the fade in and out thing. It's nice. So then, I still have to make this interactive, right? Like we still have to put buttons on this guy. So what you do is you create a blank frame, and I made these frames as circular frames or ellipse-based frames, but they're empty. They don't have anything in them. I made a separate layer called buttons, and I just created very simple elliptical frames and duplicated those 10 times, and used the buttons and forms panel to then very simply select each one of those frames that I did, turn it into a button, say on release or tap, the action that you want to be able to take is to go to a specific page. It's like such brainless activity to sit there and be like, go to page 6, thank you, go to page 7, thank you, go to page 8. But it just makes the basics of interactivity, right? So this one in particular was going to page 2. And then I didn't have a page 2, so I had to make one. So you say insert page, and you can insert however many pages you want, and then place your new art, right? That's the art that I used for all the different collective pages, and there they are. So when I say go to page 2, there's actually a page 2 to go to. Right? This is another photo that Naomi took of the box with the wrapping paper still on the candy. And so what we used that for was a framing device to drop the videos into. And so what we do is say file place, and we'd grab one of those MP4 videos and just place it right in the middle of the frame. We want that to play on page load, right? We also want a controller. Poster frame and a controller that allows us to do all the controls, like play, stop, seek, mute, volume, and all that stuff. And then, of course, we'd make a button up there in the top to go to the first page, right? Go back to the first page, right? Click the X to choose another candy, right? Now, when we say click the X to go next or go previous, how do we make that audio that Naomi used to say, click the X to go to another candy? Well, we use the iPad, or we use the laptop and those headphones, but at one point we were like in the parking lot of the museum, and there was a lot of like boom, 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 boom from all the cars in the parking lot, and it was a little noisy and it wasn't very loud, right? So we used the M4A, it's just an MP4 audio file from my phone. I just airdropped it to the laptop. We opened it in Adobe Audition, and by the way, that's a photo of Naomi and I using Audition to, like, at the actual museum itself, to do the noise reduction and put it into the final project. And again, this is the kind of thing where it's a little intimidating if you've never opened it before, but there's a couple of really easy things you can do to make your life a lot easier. One of them is to select anything on the waveform readout that is blank, and just with your selection tool, and just say cut, Command X, or just get rid of it, right? Just get rid of any of the dead air, right? Nobody likes dead air, least of all me, which is why I haven't stopped talking in 60 minutes. So once we do that, since it was a little bit quiet, we went through and normalized it. And this is not like you're weird, so we're making you normal. This is, you're soft, and we're making you normal with the rest of the audible range, right? So we normalized it, and that, it's not bringing up the volume, it's increasing the range of the sounds to like the audible spectrum. And so that's what we did by normalizing, and then we used the noise reduction process, which is a little too much for me to get into right now. Then we saved it, because we knew we were using an ebook. The audio format for ebooks is MP3. It's not M4A. And so we had to export it to an MP3. And again, this is the reason, Adobe Media Encoder and Premiere and Audition, that's why I like these, is because they have all of the standard formats ready to go. We export it, and then way down there in the corner, I don't know if you can see, I put a little blank frame, and that's where in the media panel, I gave it the direction to, so in the media panel, that's where I directed the sound to come from. So when Naomi talks and does that voiceover and saying, touch the X to choose another candy, the media is actually right down there in the corner where nobody's looking for it or can see it, and it's also in a blank frame, so it's invisible, right? So it's a little trick of the trade to get that in there, right? And we don't want that to be playing over the video, so we have it in the timing panel as the second thing that comes up. So this whole thing is wired up. All the pages are there, the media is there, the videos are there, the buttons all work. The last thing that we do to get it out the door is export it to a EPUB document, which is really just an HTML document with CSS and JavaScript, all wrapped up in a little zip that an ebook reader like iBooks on the iPad is going to read. And this is a fixed layout, right? A lot of ebooks are reflowable, and we did not want this to reflow because we had a very specific design in mind for it. So we used the fixed layout EPUB because it was, we knew exactly what we were going to get. And there's a lot of settings for EPUB, and to be honest with you, I don't actually pay that close attention because this is a pretty specific use case. What I do pay attention to is getting it out online, right? Remember I said I had an HTML version of it, and Publish Online is the service that allows me to take my fixed layout EPUB and get it up into a HTML browser with also identical fidelity. So it's really useful. So I clicked that little checkbox when I was done, entered the metadata, gave it the date, gave it the description and the creator, and it actually creates an identifier for me. And then it grinds through it. You can see why I chose to do this as click-through and not as a live demo, because this usually takes, with 10 big videos, it would take a while for us to wait for the building and the uploading and whatnot. Once it's done making that EPUB file, which I can then airdrop to the iPad and test, it then gives me the parameters for, well, you want to take this EPUB, which is made, after all, of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and get it up onto the Publish Online service, which will allow you to view it in perfect fidelity on the web. And so what is the metadata you want to do there, right? And that metadata that I entered for the EPUB is also visible here, which is great, which means I don't have to do a lot of extra work. I can choose the thumbnail for it. I can choose the resolution, right? If people are going to be looking at this on a high-powered device, it publishes it, it uploads it, it gets it up there on the interwebs, and now I've got this great dashboard where I can see all the things that I've published, and I can click it and view that project as an HTML project on the web, right? Plays back to video, everything's great. I can share it to social media, and I can also see very easily through this dashboard how many people have seen it, how many readers, the average time they spent on it, the total reading time, etc. So it's actually really useful and powerful if you're trying to get basic analytics on something that you publish, and from InDesign you can get to the Publish Online dashboard to find that stuff out about anything that you publish. So again, creating those timed animations, creating those buttons, those action, those media, and then testing and exporting. So I only have 6 minutes left to tell you about how we use Spark, because again, it was about telling the story of telling the story with this responsive mobile storytelling app, getting assets again from everywhere and publishing it and showing the world, right? This is how we told StoryCorps. This is how we told everybody. We used Spark Page on iOS, actually. We didn't use it in the web browser. As you can see, it recognizes that I'm logged in. I can see all the different pages that I've made over the course of God knows how long, but I create a new one. And again, this page is going to be available everywhere. So adding something like an image, I can pull not only from Adobe Stock or from Lightroom, but from the Creative Cloud where I have a whole bunch of assets, right? These are like my folders on my desktop where I have just a whole bunch of random assets. In the My Family Story folder on my desktop, I've got all these things that I use to make the videos, right? And this one in particular, the family tree that we used in one of them, that I would like to be the background. So it just drops it right in there, and I can use the focal point tool to determine where the image is going to, what we're going to see first in that image when we're looking at the final HTML page. That focal point tool is really useful. I can just type in a good old title, right? I can say, well, which template do I like the most? I think I'm going to like the Luca template the most. I can go in and add some quick text. And I can say, right, by Naomi and Jerry Silverman. It's a beautiful story. And I can go up to the H1, H2, quotation marks and figure out which one I like best. I like the H1. Then I can just start adding a glide show, which is, as it sounds, it glides up and down. I'm going to add from that Lightroom catalog that I had. Actually, this is a catalog from after we made the trip to Israel. And I'm just going to pick out a whole bunch of background photos, right? There's the gallery with her piece selected. There's me and her. And there's her taking the photos. And I can switch the order of these background photos if I want to, right? Switch them back down. It's really easy to use. Click Done. And now I can start adding content into the glide show, right? Add some text like a header, which is an H1, say background. Add some photos, right? Again, ticking from that repository that I had. Add a little caption in there, right? Add a little bit more from the Creative Cloud. Grab another photo, right, from my Creative Cloud assets. Now remember that logo that I got that was a vector logo? If I come in and export that as a PNG to my Creative Cloud files, which is right there again on my desktop, and I click that little gear and I say I want it to be a transparent PNG file, it's going to save it as a transparent PNG and automatically pop up on my iPad in that repository, and I can grab it, drop it in, and it's going to maintain that transparency when I drop it in that glide show. So it's really useful to save out transparent PNGs. And then, of course, add in a video, right? This is a link to the explainer video that Naomi did. It's a YouTube link, and it works just fine. But you, of course, can drag in a Spark video link as well, right? So once that's done, I can share it. I can add all kinds of metadata. I can say, searchably, I want it to be a story. I can, choose to show that I did it, or it can remain anonymous. Upload the whole thing. It's ready to share. It gives me a URL. I can tap it, go straight to Safari on the iPad, or share that however I want. And then, right, that's how it looks. It looks great. And in that dashboard, again, I can see how many people have seen it and how many people have appreciated it, so it gives me some good feedback. So again, Spark Page, iOS, Android, or web, assets from anywhere, and easy publishing. So that was a whirlwind. I brought it in right, we have 2 minutes left. I brought that in right under the wire. Can you believe that? Thank you. Woo! I told you, 16 apps in 75 minutes. These are the 3 things I want you guys to take away. Stories link one person's heart to another. Or was my heart linked to yours with the story of my grandmother and daughter and stuff like that? I hope you guys feel closer to my heart. I feel closer to yours for telling you. Thank you for allowing me to share that with you. And my bald uncle as well. Right? Telling the story of telling the story, that's going to get it out there. Right? That people are sometimes more interested in how you told the story than what the story was itself. And don't be afraid. Try something new, right? Did anybody see something in here that they had never done before with the whole breadth of the Creative Cloud, right? There's a lot in there. I mean, and there's 50 apps in the Creative Cloud, 50 apps and services. I only went through 16. So don't be afraid. Try something new. It won't bite. And you get a much richer experience when you experiment across different media. So again, these slides are available in their entirety, the entire click-through. That was another reason I did click-through instead of live demo, is so you guys could get every single screen if you so desire, and understand the exact workflow just by looking at the screenshots. So please thank you. Please feel free to take those slides away. If you want to actually view the project itself, it's right there at that URL, bit.ly, shats-candy. And thank you guys so much. You guys have been a great audience. Enjoy the rest of your time. Have a safe trip home. And we'll see you at the next Adobe Max.